Steinbach. Her center against expulsion was to focus on the fate of the 16 million post-World War II uprooted German people, in particular the 2.5 million who did not survive forced labor, rape, and deportation. The documentation also was to commemorate the successful integration into the economic and social structure of post-war Germany. In fact, the center itself was meant to be part of this integration, possibly its closure. And therefore, the integration into society of the post-World War II expellees remains incomplete as long as the memorial in question is not being realized. In addition to the scientific documentation and museum dealings, a Requiem Rotunda was planned as a place for grief, compassion, and forgiveness. And finally, in addition to the post-World War II German tragedy, 30 other people's genocides, ethnic cleansings, and expulsions, which in all involved some 80 million human beings in 20th century Europe, were to be commemorated. A first step was the creation of a touring exhibition, Erzwungene Wege, Flucht und Vertreibung, Escape and Expulsion in 20th century Europe. The concept's extension beyond a German-only victim perspective could not quiet foreign, in particular Polish critics, who alleged that the center was planned as an institution of vengeance and distortion of history. In 2002, the German parliament, the Bundestag, tried to assume the issue and debated it. And it turned out that one social democratic parliamentarian by the name of Markus Megel turned out as one of the Poles' biggest supporters, meaning Erika Steinbach's greatest foe. In this debate in July 2002, he exclaimed, quote, "We are against a national-oriented project. Instead, we propose a joint approach with our European partners," end of quote. He suggested the subject to a vote, a European vote after a European dialogue to decide on the venue of the center. And he said, I quote, the future will tell whether Poland does have an interest in the project and possibly would prefer Wrocław as location of the proposed institution. Wrocław is the name of the former German city Breslau, but he wouldn't dare to call this former German city by its German name. He is chairman of a German-Polish group of parliamentarians and had, as such, made the official Polish polemic against the German center his own, taking recourse to Polish assertions of German collective guilt and with arguments equal to those of nationalist Polish politicians. He argued that the realization of such a memorial in Berlin would mean nothing less than as, quote, as those who started the Second World War, who made the Holocaust happen, who killed millions of Poles, who conducted a war of destruction, we suddenly would want to present ourselves as victims, end of quote. Independently, a petition initiated by some left-leaning politicians and intellectuals in 2003 and signed by several hundred people, primarily German, Czech, and Polish historians. Opponents of the proposed center expressed concerns that, quote, taken out of historical context, it would establish and popularize a one-sided image of the past, end of quote. They warned of dangers of decontextualizing the past and ethnification of conflicts. The German Jewish writer Ralph Giordano withdrew his initial support for the center for the same reason. But he defended Steinbach against personal accusations from Poland, which he called bluntly defamation. The then German Foreign Minister Joschka Fischer said, quote, "This cannot be a museum of German victims. Germans cannot point fingers at others," end of quote. Thus, the Pole's sentiments resonated well in the minds of left-leaning German intellectuals and the then red-green coalition government, which in opposition to Steinbach's center initiated the concept of a European network of memory and solidarity, specifically denouncing a primarily German-oriented point of view. They demanded internationalization of the project and suggested a venue not in Germany but somewhere in the territory of the expeller states like Warsaw or some city in the Czech Republic. They demanded that under no circumstances should the expulsion of Germans be the core of research, exhibitions, and publications, because, quote, "We Germans are a people of perpetrators," end of quote. The perpetrator characteristics in the minds of these lefties applies above all to the German expellees, who then Chancellor Schröder called, quote, "nothing more than a political French group." And he followed, or some other high official in his government followed with a statement, quote, "The expellees must be aware of the fact that they themselves caused their fate and are responsible for it." There you have it. German victims are themselves responsible for their fate. This applies to the 75,000 children under age 14 who died before December of 1944 in Allied bombing raids. It applies to all the 600,000 victims of the bombing raids. It applies to the 2,000 Allied prisoners of war who died in Dresden on 13 and 14 February 1945. Why didn't they revolt against their guards instead of complying with their demands? Thus is the argument in Germany concerning expellees and other German victims. In contrast to the social democratic opposition before the 2005 general elections, the then German opposition parties, the Christian Democrats and the Christian Socialists, both unequivocally endorsed the establishment of a center. However, when the 2005 elections did not produce a civic majority, the Christian Democrats and Christian Socialists distanced themselves from earlier commitments and comments. Instead, a coalition agreement with the Social Democrats stated a compromise, according to which a visible sign was to be created in Berlin to commemorate the expulsions, in context with the Social Democrats' European network concept. A planning committee was established and tasked with developing the concept of such a visible sign. 3 years after signing the coalition agreement, the visible sign in Berlin appeared to become reality. On 3 September 2008, the German federal government passed a law calling for the establishment of a center against expulsions in the Deutschlandhaus near Anhalter Bahnhof in Berlin-Kreuzberg. The law was passed by the Bundestag and was enacted on 29 December 2008. And the center was to be run by the government-administered foundation, Historical Museum in Germany, Historical Museum. The purpose of the center was the Non-Autonomatus Foundation is to ensure, in the spirit of reconciliation, the remembrance of flight and expulsion in the 20th century in the historical context of the Second World War and the Nazi expansion and extermination policy and their aftermath, hinting toward how it would look like. A 13-member scientific advisory board was